The biker's crew noticed the black waitress limping through her shift, hiding pain beneath 4 smiles. But when they saw who walked through that door, what they did next didn't involve a single punch, but it froze everyone who learned the truth. The door to Rosie's cafe swung open with a groan, and the sound of leather and chrome followed. 10 motorcycles lined up outside like a steel battalion, engines ticking as they cooled under the Memphis sun. Inside, the cafe went still. A man at the counter lowered his newspaper slowly. A mother pulled her daughter closer in the corner booth. The waitress behind the counter looked up, her smile practiced but wary. Drake Harlan stepped inside first, sunglasses reflecting the afternoon light slanting through the blinds. His crew followed Marcus, Javier, Tyrone, all broad-shouldered men in worn leather vests with the Steel Vultures patch stitched across their backs. "Afternoon," Drake said, his voice carrying that particular kind of calm that made people exhale. He removed his sunglasses, folding them carefully. "We'll take the back booths. Coffee for everyone." The Steel Vultures weren't here to intimidate. They'd just finished a charity ride, $4,000 worth of supplies delivered to a youth shelter on the north side. Good day, clean consciences, the kind of tiredness that felt earned. Rosie's Cafe was one of those roadside places time had forgotten to ruin. Cracked vinyl booths patched with duct tape, a ceiling fan that squeaked with every rotation. The smell of fried bacon and burnt coffee was so thick you could taste it. Behind the counter, a black woman in her late 20s moved toward the coffee station. Her name tag read Tamika in faded blue letters. "Coming right up," she said. Her smile was genuine, but tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Drake watched her move. That's when he saw it. The slight hitch in her left leg. Not obvious. Subtle. The kind of limp someone developed when they'd learned to hide pain, so it became part of their rhythm. His crew settled into booths, still buzzing from the ride. "Yo, Drake," Marcus laughed, pulling off his bandana. "Remember that kid who asked if your bike could fly? His face when you revved the engine," Javier added, grinning. "Priceless." Drake nodded, but his attention had drifted. Tamika was carrying a tray of coffee mugs, balanced perfectly despite the way she favored her right side. Overcompensating, protecting something. When she reached their table, she set the cups down with practiced efficiency. But Drake noticed the slight tremor in her right hand, the way she shifted her weight. "Sugar's on the table, cream's coming," she said, her voice light. "You boys need menus? Or just coffee today?" "Just coffee's fine," Drake said, then carefully on shift. Something flickered across her face. A shadow, a memory. "Every shift's long here," she said with a forced brightness. "But it's honest work." The cafe went silent except for the breaking glass. "Damn it," Tamika whispered, dropping to her knees. Her hands shook as she picked up the pieces. "I'm so sorry. I'll clean this up. Hey, no worries," the man at the counter said gently. "Happens to everybody." But Drake saw what nobody else did. Tears gathered in her eyes that had nothing to do with the broken mug. And when she stood, she put weight on that left leg wrong and winced a sharp, involuntary wince that she tried to hide by coughing. The cook came through the kitchen door, a stocky man with tired eyes and flour on his apron. "Tamika, you okay?" "Fine, Harold. Just clumsy today." Her voice was bright. Too bright. Drake looked at his crew. They'd all gone quiet. Men who'd seen things. Men who recognized things. Javier leaned in, voice low. "Boss, that's—" "I know," Drake said quietly. They finished their coffee in near silence. The usual banter felt wrong now. Drake left 3 20s for an $8 tab. Then he pulled out one of his cards, the plain ones with just his initials and a phone number. No logo. Nothing threatening. He waited until Tamika came back to clear their table. "Ma'am," he said, standing. The rest of his crew stood too, out of habit and respect. "You take care of yourself." She looked at him, really looked, and for a moment something passed between them. An understanding, a question, maybe a plea. "You too," she said softly. Drake placed the card face down beneath the money. Then he and his crew walked out, the door groaning shut behind them. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted everything gold. The motorcycles sat in a perfect line, chrome gleaming like promises. Drake pulled on his sunglasses but didn't mount his bike yet. "Are we staying?" Marcus asked. "Not yet," Drake said. "But we're coming back." He looked back through the window. Tamika stood at their table, staring down at the card and the money. She picked up the card slowly, read it, then pressed it against her chest like a secret. That's when Drake saw them. She moved to the next booth. The limp was more pronounced from behind. Drake's jaw tightened. Marcus noticed his expression. "Boss." "Nothing," Drake said quietly. But it wasn't nothing. The thing about Drake Harlan was this. He'd grown up in a house where his mother hid bruises with makeup and long sleeves. He'd learned early that silence could be its own kind of violence. He'd sworn at 16, standing in a hospital waiting room while doctors treated his mother's broken ribs, that he'd never ignore the signs again. Tamika returned with cream. When she leaned over to set it down, her sleeve rode up slightly. Just enough. A bracelet of purple and yellow bruises decorated her wrist, the kind that didn't come from accidents. Drake's blood went cold. She noticed him noticing. Their eyes met for half a second, hers widening with something like panic, before she tugged her sleeve down and moved away. Too quickly. She caught her hip on the edge of a table. A coffee mug slipped from her tray and shattered against the floor. For motorcycles pulled into the far end of the parking lot. Darker bikes, meaner edges, painted across their gas tanks in blood red. A coiled cobra with fangs bared. The shadow cobras. Tamika saw them too. Through the window, Drake watched her face drain of color. She stumbled backward, the card falling from her hand. She didn't pick it up. She just moved quickly toward the kitchen, her limp forgotten in her urgency to disappear. The men on the dark bikes hadn't dismounted yet. They just sat there, engines rumbling low, watching a cafe. Watching. Drake's hand curled into a fist. "Boss," Marcus said, a warning in his voice. "We don't know what this is." "We know enough," Drake said. But he didn't move toward them. Not yet. Instead, he started his bike, and his crew followed suit. 10 engines roared to life in unison, a sound like thunder, like a promise. As they pulled away, Drake looked in his rearview mirror one last time. The men on the dark bikes were still there, still watching. And through the cafe window, he could just make out Tamika's silhouette in the kitchen doorway. She was shaking. The Steel Vultures' garage smelled like motor oil and purpose. Drake arrived at dawn, before the Memphis sun had burned through the morning fog. The shop sat on the east side of town. Legitimate business they'd built over a decade. Clean books, honest work, everything their father's generation hadn't been. Marcus was already there, hunched over a laptop in the cramped office. Coffee steamed beside him, forgotten. "Couldn't sleep either?" Drake asked. Marcus didn't look up. Not after yesterday. He turned the screen. Police databases, public records, satellite images of a warehouse district. Called in a favor with Detective Reed. Got everything on Darnell Hayes and Cobra Customs. Drake leaned in. The file was thick with red flags. Assault charges dismissed due to witness intimidation. Suspected involvement in stolen vehicle operations. Known associate of organized crime. The pattern was clear. Dangerous but careful. Smart enough to stay just outside the law's reach. "There's more," Marcus said, clicking to another document. A photograph appeared. Darnell Hayes, maybe 4 years younger, arm draped around a smiling black woman at some outdoor barbecue. Her face partially obscured by sunglasses. But Drake recognized the slope of her shoulders, the cautious way she held herself even while smiling. Tamika. They were together, Drake said quietly. For 3 years. She filed a restraining order. It expired. Then she disappeared from Memphis entirely. Marcus scrolled down. Changed her name from Tamika Hayes to Tamika Reynolds. Used her mother's maiden name. Started over. The office door opened. Javier walked in carrying a tablet and an energy drink, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. Got into Cobra Customs security system, he said, dropping into a chair. Wasn't even that hard. Darnell's overconfident. He swiped through images on the tablet. Look at this. Surveillance footage showed motorcycles being stripped in a warehouse. License plates removed. VIN numbers ground off. Parts packaged and loaded into unmarked trucks. That's the Poplar Avenue warehouse, Marcus said. Been supposedly vacant for 2 years. Javier grinned tiredly. Ran the plates on the bikes going in and out. 7 matches to stolen vehicle reports across 3 states. Big money operation. Drake paced a small office, his crew watching him think. They'd learned years ago to let him work through problems his way. Darnell found Tamika, Drake said finally. Probably by chance. Wrong person recognized her. Now he's back, sending a message. Keep quiet about what she knows or else. So we roll up to his operation and show him what or else really means, Javier said, cracking his knuckles. No. They both looked at Drake in surprise. Boss, we can't just... We're not doing nothing, Drake interrupted. His voice calm but edged with steel. But think, Darnell expects fists. It's what men like him understand. We go in swinging, maybe we win. Maybe we don't. Either way, it escalates. He brings more guys. People get hurt. He turned to face them fully. Maybe Tamika gets hurt. Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. We take him down through the law. Exactly. Drake tapped the laptop. Reed says the DA needs hard evidence. We'll get them evidence. We document everything. Build a case they can't ignore. And we make sure Tamika's name never comes up. That's cold, boss, Javier said slowly. I like it. It's smart, Drake corrected. And it works. Tamika's apartment was small and dim. The kind of place you rented when you wanted to disappear. 3rd floor, walk up. Peeling paint. A view of nothing but other people's windows. She sat on her worn couch, staring at the business card. DH 901-555-0147. She'd picked it up 100 times since yesterday. Put it down 100 times. What would she even say? Help me, I'm scared. She'd tried that before. Police had been sympathetic, filed reports, issued orders that meant nothing the moment Darnell decided they meant nothing. Her phone buzzed. A text from Harold, which reads thus, take tomorrow off too. Doctor's orders. She almost laughed. Harold wasn't a doctor, just a good man who'd seen too much to pretend he didn't see her pain. A knock at the door froze her blood. Tamika moved silently to the peephole, heart hammering. The hallway was empty. She waited a full minute before cracking the door open. Nothing. Just stained carpet and flickering fluorescent lights. Then she looked down. A brown cardboard box sat at her doorstep. A white envelope rested on top. She grabbed it quickly, locked herself inside, hands trembling as she opened the envelope. For the long shifts. You're not alone. DH. Inside the box, wrapped in tissue paper. Orthopedic walking shoes. Black, professional, expensive. Her exact size. Something cracked open in Tamika's chest. She sank to the floor, clutching the shoes, and cried. Not from fear this time. From something else. Something she'd almost forgotten existed. Kindness without conditions. She cried until she had no tears left. Then she put the shoes on. They fit perfectly. When she stood and walked to the window, her leg barely protested. Outside, 3 motorcycles were parked across the street. 2 men worked on one of the bikes, tools spread out casually. But Tamika recognized the leather vests. The way one man kept glancing toward her building. The way another kept his hand near his jacket pocket. They were watching, protecting. Her first instinct was panic. They're strangers. But even as the thought formed, she knew something important. They'd seen her at her lowest and hadn't demanded anything, just left a card. And now they were here, asking nothing in return. For the first time in days, her shoulders relaxed. She saved the number in her phone. Didn't call, just saved it. A lifeline. 2 nights later, Tyrone and Javier crouched on the roof of an abandoned textile factory across from the Poplar Avenue warehouse. Night vision cameras, long lenses, military-grade patience. Count, Javier whispered. 6 bikes in 3 hours, Tyrone rumbled. 2-panel trucks, all Cobra affiliates. They photographed everything. License plates, faces, times, VIN numbers visible through open warehouse doors. By morning, they had 43 photographs and 12 minutes of video. Detective Harlan Reed met Drake in a diner on the opposite side of Memphis. Neutral ground. The detective was in his 50s, gray-haired, with the weary eyes of a man who'd seen justice delayed too many times. This better be good, Harlan, Reed said, sliding into the booth. Drake slid a USB drive across the table. Cobra Customs. Stolen vehicle operation running through the Poplar warehouse. Everything you need. Reed pocketed the drive without looking at it. The DA's been wanting Darnell Hayes for years. If this is solid. It's solid, Drake said. But there's a condition. Reed raised an eyebrow. There's a witness. She stays anonymous. Completely. The detective studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Done. The next morning, Tamika saw the motorcycles again. This time, she made a decision. She walked downstairs, carrying a cardboard tray with 4 coffees. Her new shoes made barely sound. The men across the street stiffened as she approached, but didn't move. Up close, they were even more intimidating. All leather and scars and quiet power. Thought you might need this, she said, offering the tray. The massive one, Tyrone, she'd learned, accepted it with surprising gentleness. Thank you, ma'am. Drake appeared from behind one of the bikes, wiping grease from his hands. No one should have to live afraid, he said simply. You don't even know me, Tamika whispered. We know enough. She smiled, actually smiled, then walked back to her building, her limp barely noticeable. That afternoon, Darnell showed up at Rosie's Cafe. He walked in like he owned the place, 3 cobras behind him, sat at the counter, stared at Tamika until she had no choice but to serve him. Still here, he said, his voice low and cold. Thought you'd learn to run better than this. Harold stepped out from the kitchen, baseball bat visible against the counter. Darnell laughed. Old man, you really want to do this? She said she's fine, Harold said firmly. Time for you to leave. Across the street, hidden in a parked sedan, Javier's camera captured everything. Every word, every threat, every moment of intimidation. Darnell finally stood, leaned close to Tamika. This ain't over. But his voice carried a new edge, uncertainty. He'd noticed the sedan, the watching. As the Cobras roared away, Javier transferred the final file with the name. Cobras Final. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Dawn broke gray and heavy over Memphis. The kind of morning where the sky looked bruised and the air tasted like rain that refused to fall. Drake stood on the rooftop of an abandoned grain elevator. Binoculars pressed his eyes. Below, the Poplar Avenue warehouse was surrounded. Unmarked sedans blocked every exit. Tactical units crouched behind vehicles, waiting for the signal. Marcus stood beside him, arms crossed. Reed doesn't do anything small. He's been waiting years for this, Drake said. At exactly 6:47 a.m., Detective Harlan Reed's voice crackled across police radios. Execute. The warehouse doors exploded inward. Even from their distant vantage point, Drake and Marcus could hear the chaos. Shouting, boots on concrete, engines dying mid-rev as keys were ripped from ignitions. Men in cobra patches scattered like roaches when the lights came on. Some ran for back exits only to find SWAT teams waiting. Others dropped tools and raised their hands immediately, smart enough to know when they'd lost. Through the binoculars, Drake watched Darnell Hayes stumble out of a side office, shirtless and disoriented, clearly caught off guard. 2 officers tackled him to the ground. He fought back, screaming something Drake couldn't hear but could imagine. Probably threats. Probably her name. No guns, Marcus said quietly. No fists. Just truth. Drake lowered the binoculars, his jaw tight with satisfaction. Sometimes that's enough. They watched until the last Cobra was loaded into a police van, until the warehouse was sealed with yellow tape, until Detective Reed emerged, pulling off his tactical vest, and looked up toward the grain elevator. He didn't wave, didn't acknowledge them, just gave a single nod. Drake nodded back. Then he and Marcus walked down the rusted fire escape, mounted their bikes, and rode away as sirens echoed through the industrial district like a closing hymn. 5 days later, Rosie's Cafe felt different, lighter somehow, as if the building itself had exhaled. The morning sun streamed through the blinds in warm golden stripes. The jukebox played something from the 70s, all horns and optimism. The smell of fresh coffee and frying bacon filled the air like a promise kept. Tamika moved between tables with something she hadn't carried in years. Ease. She still limped slightly, some injuries never fully healed, but it no longer defined her. She laughed at Harold's terrible jokes. She remembered customers' orders. She wore the orthopedic shoes that had arrived at her door, and her steps were lighter for it. The news had spread fast. Cobra Customs dismantled in major trafficking bust. The Memphis papers had run it on the front page. 16 arrests. Millions in stolen property recovered. Darnell Hayes held without bail pending trial. The door swung open, and the Steel Vultures walked in. This time, the cafe didn't go silent. The man at the counter nodded in greeting. The mother in the corner booth smiled. Even Harold called out from the kitchen, "Morning, gentlemen." Drake removed his sunglasses, and his eyes found Tamika immediately. She met his gaze and smiled, genuinely freely, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, recognition, the quiet understanding of two people who'd both survived different kinds of wars. "Coffee?" she asked, walking over with a pot already in hand. "Please," Drake said. She poured for all of them, Drake, Marcus, Javier, Tyrone. Her hand steady, her voice light. "On the house today," she said. "Ma'am, you don't have to. I want to." Drake nodded, accepting the gift for what it was. Not charity, reciprocity. Tamika turned to head back to the counter, then paused. "Thank you," she said quietly, not looking back, "for everything you didn't have to do." "We did what was right," Drake said simply. She nodded, wiping her eyes quickly, then disappeared into the kitchen. The Steel Vultures drank their coffee in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that comes after a battle won without bloodshed. Then the door opened again. Darnell Hayes walked in. The cafe froze. He looked hollowed out, thinner, unshaven, wearing the kind of desperation that clung to men who'd lost everything. Out on bail through some expensive lawyer's loophole, but visibly broken. His eyes locked on Tamika. She stood behind the counter, coffee pot still in her hand, and for a moment her body tensed with old instinct. But she didn't run, didn't hide. Harold stepped out from the kitchen, bat in hand. But Drake raised a hand slightly. "Wait." Darnell walked slowly toward the counter, ignoring everyone else. "You think you can just erase me?" His voice cracked, desperate and angry. "After everything? You think you can just—" "No," Tamika said, her voice trembling but clear. "I didn't erase you, Darnell." She set the coffee pot down, stood straighter, and looked him dead in the eyes. "I outgrew you." The words hung in the air like a verdict. "Home's wherever you're not," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "And I'm finally home." Darnell's face contorted. Rage, grief, disbelief, all fighting for dominance. He took a step forward. Drake rose from his booth, slow and deliberate. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. Just stood there, 6 feet of quiet steel, flanked by Marcus and Tyrone. Darnell's eyes darted between them, then back to Tamika. He was looking at her like he'd once looked at prey, but she wasn't prey anymore. She was standing tall, surrounded by people who'd chosen to protect her without asking for anything in return. He was the ghost now, the relic of a past she'd survived. "You did this," Darnell said hoarsely, pointing at her. "You called them." "I didn't call anyone," Tamika said calmly. "You did this to yourself." For a long moment, Darnell just stood there, hollowed out and powerless. Then he turned and walked out without another word, the door groaning shut behind him. The cafe exhaled collectively. Tamika's knees buckled slightly. She caught herself on the counter, and tears began to fall. But this time they weren't born from fear. They were relief, release, the kind of crying that only comes when you finally let go. Harold put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded, wiping her eyes, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yeah, I really am." Drake sat back down and Marcus leaned over. "That was almost too easy." "He was already beaten," Drake said quietly, watching through the window as Darnell climbed into a rusted sedan and drove away. "We just made sure he knew it." Marcus smiled. "Sometimes the loudest victories don't need noise." Drake nodded, sipping his coffee. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds fully, flooding the cafe with golden light. It streamed through the blinds and painted everything warm. The scratch tables, the worn vinyl booths, Tamika's tear-stained but smiling face. Healing light. The Steel Vultures finished their coffee, left a generous tip folded under their cups, and walked out into the morning. Their boots echoed on the sidewalk as they mounted their bikes. Tamika stood in the doorway, watching them. Drake looked back one last time, tipped his head in farewell, and kick-started his engine. 10 motorcycles roared to life in unison. Not a threat this time, but a promise kept. As they rode off down the Memphis backroads, Tamika stayed in the doorway, smiling freely, whole again. Behind her, Harold flipped the open sign and called out, "Tamika, we got customers." She turned, her limp barely noticeable, and called back, "Coming." And she walked back inside, into the light, into her life, into the freedom she'd fought so hard to reclaim. They didn't save her with violence. They saved her with honor. Because real strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply stands between a woman and her fear. Some stories don't just end. They set us free. If this one moved you, join us for more powerful stories that inspire, heal, and remind us of our shared humanity. Subscribe to Twister Stories and never miss the next one.